Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb. Welcome, everyone, to MotorWeek podcast number 321. I am indeed your host, John Davis. We've got a great podcast for you today. We've got huge news from Dodge as they have just unveiled details of the 8th generation Charger. And yes, it's an EV first, but it also includes a gas engine. That's the big surprise. But first, we'll talk about one of our favorite new all-electrics, the impressive Kia EV9 midsize utility, and then we'll discuss a first drive in another midsizer with a gas engine, the rugged but still luxurious Lexus GX. Our lightning round examines a recent viral tweet on what the size of a vehicle means for safety, and a viewer has a question on how we perform our track testing. Joining me today are our over-the-edge reporter Greg Carlos.
Hey.
Digital producer Jessica Ray.
Hello.
And writer Alex Kellum.
Howdy.
Okay, before we get into that, I wonder, do you know that you can watch our series MotorWeek and other great PBS programming anytime, anywhere, on almost any screen with the free PBS app? So download the app on your smart TV or your device and you'll never miss a mile of MotorWeek. It's good advice. All right, for those of you interested in a three-row utility, there are tons of options out there. But for those who want an all-electric three-rower, the options up to now have been slim and expensive. Enter the Kia EV9, an electric vehicle that is very similar in size to Kia's popular gas-powered Kia Telluride, and with a $55,000 starting price, under $60,000, folks. We recently spent a few weeks living with one, and we've got some strong impressions. And Greg, why don't you start us off on what you thought of the Kia EV9? 3-row, 6 and 7 passenger, family-size SUV, looks very much like a Telluride. Take it from there.
Yeah, I got to spend a whole weekend with my whole family, cruising around, doing our normal tasks. For anybody who's interested in hearing whether or not it's similar to a Telluride, it's pretty identical.
I really think it is a Telluride with an EV heart.
It is a little bit bigger, heftier for sure. We're talking about for the Telluride, the weight range, the curb weight goes from about 4,100 to 4,500, depending on trim. So when you move up to the all-electric EV9, now we're talking about 5,700, 5,800 max.
So you got over 1,000 pounds more just
hefty.
Batteries.
And that's probably what I notice most in our daily driving of it, is that it does certainly feel like a hefty vehicle, but you get the advantages of a hefty vehicle in that it is sizable. For me, with our 2 kids and 2 car seats, getting them in and out was easy. We had the 6-passenger, so we had the captain's chairs, or hold on, how many? Yeah, 6-passenger.
Right.
So that was great. Plenty of space in the back for all of our groceries. Up front, there is a frunk, albeit a very small one. We were able to, I only was able to fit like about a bag of produce and a couple other things in there. But it is nice to have. I'd rather have a small frunk than no frunk at all.
No frunk at all.
Yeah. I will say, I remembered the most recent Telluride we drove with the V6. An okay powertrain, by no means a super advanced one or even a super smooth one or powerful. It's just kind of like a powertrain.
It's a decent V6 cylinder powertrain.
The EV9's powertrain, the all-electric powertrain, is so smooth. And to me, that might be one of the biggest appeals and one of the biggest advantages over the Telluride. And it's not really something specific to Kia. It's just the EV powertrain in general, right?
They're smoother. They don't make as much noise.
No transmission that you have to worry about.
Right.
No transmission. I love being able to dial in as much regenerative braking with the paddles, which is the way it should be. So the regenerative braking, again, is just being able to let off the accelerator pedal and it'll automatically start slowing down for you and start giving you energy back into the battery. You can go all the way up to where it will bring you down to a full stop.
So you can do pure one-pedal driving if you really want to.
Or you can turn it completely off.
Right.
But the important thing for me is being able to control it with the paddle. Some brands will do it through the screen, which is just wrong. It needs to be on the paddle. So
you can get to
does it right.
And I'm curious, Greg, like you're driving around with children and lots of passengers. You're not driving by yourself. So
you wouldn't
I'm
know
assuming the regen, you'd want to like be able to control that on
yes, and I do quite often.
You don't want it to be so jolting that it basically surprises everybody.
Like depending on the highway versus when you're like driving in the city, it's important for passengers.
And I don't know if it's me being an enthusiast and I just like being engaged. It's not a set it and forget it for me.
Yeah.
When I'm in a city setting or a highway setting, I'm constantly like, it's sometimes like I just don't want to touch the brake.
Yeah.
So I dial in a little regen braking and it's enough. So I enjoy doing that. Getting down to the nitty gritty of power and everything like that, extremely powerful. Torque is 516 pound-feet compared to 379 horsepower. So vastly more torque than horsepower. And torque's the thing that everybody likes.
Feel it.
And we should say we had the Land all-wheel drive trim, which is almost all the way to the top. Ours was about $70,000.
I think it was 75.
I was looking through Kia's spec sheets. They said like a 5-second 0 to 60. I hit 4.5.
We were under 5.
Yeah, we were under 5, and I cannot tell you how mundane 4.5 seconds feels now. Like it's incredible. A nearly 6,000 pound SUV is going 0 to 60 consistently over 10 runs, 4.5, 4.6, 4.5, 4.6, just over and over again. And I'm just like cruising to the grocery store. It's that incredible now. So really not something to overlook. It's just how quick. And I guess you can look at this as, is this a scary thing? Cruising that fast in something so big?
But the base vehicle, which is the one we were talking about of under 60 grand, around 55 grand plus freight, that's just a single motor.
And it's rear-wheel drive.
And rear-wheel drive, and that, folks, that's a change from a lot of modern vehicles. It's not, the base model is not front-wheel drive, it's rear drive. But that particular one did not have that kind of rocket acceleration. You haven't driven that, but I have. And it's still very adequate. I would rate it probably not quite on par with the Telluride, but close. But it's you're not going to sacrifice a lot of performance, daily performance, if you go with the least expensive model.
Yeah, and it's because, and we've talked about this before, it's not necessarily the amount of thrust, it's how the thrust is delivered. So you could be in something like that light trim level, and because it's so instant, it feels faster than it actually is, and it's useful on the highway.
And I think when it's quiet, it sometimes feels faster than
you can
it is.
You can add sounds to it too.
Yeah,
you can make it sound like something if you like through the menu system.
Yep.
So I want to get through my my highlights and things that I really noticed over my weekend. So this is about 100 kilowatt hour battery. Which for ours is rated at 280 mile.
270 something. Yeah.
Well, for the Land.
One we had was 280.
280 for the Land.
We got, and Alex, you did the loop on it, and you were on track to get what it said.
Yep.
But when you get to a full charge, I was seeing over 300 miles.
Yeah, they upped, I think from the time I first drove it, which was a pre-production model, they upped that range by 10 miles or something like that.
And for such a big vehicle, I was averaging 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which is pretty good.
It's okay.
You like to be up over 3, ideally, for like the really efficient ones, and even 4, you're getting 4s and the really, really efficient ones. But 2.7 is pretty good. I want to talk about charging because I had to charge it a few times, exclusively DC fast charging. This is where Hyundai and Kia, I think, separate themselves from other EVs, namely, say, Toyota, Lexus. They charge extremely fast.
Yeah.
I went from, this is all anecdotal evidence, mind you. I went to an Electrify America charging station. I was at about 35% state of charge. I plugged in, went to Walmart, came back out. So 35 to 95%.
I'm impressed that you got to 95.
Well, here's the thing that separates. So 35 to 95, about 40 minutes.
That's pretty good.
Which is pretty good. It equated to a little over 200 miles, which I was thrilled about. But then I looked at the price. It was about $45, $42, $45, something like that.
So
which if you start breaking down the math, it's less. In a
if it was a Telluride, that would be 8 gallons of gas. So that's $5 a gallon.
Correct. So
that's more than most diesel in our East Coast.
Truth be told, DC fast charges shouldn't be used as regular charging. You should be getting your quote unquote value charging at home on level 2s.
Because it actually does degrade the battery.
Correct. So really you shouldn't be going to 95, but I didn't know it was going to charge that fast. And that's what I'm getting to, is that the 20% to 80% range is the sweet spot. That's when chargers go their fastest. What I noticed when I got to above 80%, the speed did drop off. So I was pulling in well over 100 kilowatts. Even when I got over 80, I was still pulling 60, 70, which is superior to other brands. So even when you get over that 80% threshold, this Kia was still charging really fast, just not as fast as it's capable of charging. So that's an advantage there. And like I said, I happen to be charging next to somebody who was in a Lexus, what's their RZ. And while I just finished charging mine, which I was maxing at like 112 or 120 at the time, she was only maxing at like 30.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
I didn't know the circumstances, how warm it was, what it
Yeah.
was like that. But there is a difference. So anecdotally, it makes a difference between brands of how fast these things charge. That was probably my big eye-opener this weekend.
Well, that's the big reason that Kia and Hyundai have come on so strong in the EV world.
And you were only at, I'm assuming, a 150 kilowatt
150,
charger?
yeah. But so when I got my...
they can go up to 220 as a peak.
Yeah.
So you can plug these in out of 350 and get even more than that.
And my final note, because we do have a EV6 GT long-term, which I think we've all complained about the door handles, the electric.
Yes.
So they have door handles that slide back into the car, which make it completely flat for aerodynamics. When you go to them, they pop out. They don't always work the way we want them to. So the EV9, I think, has figured out that problem. The same idea where they suck back into the doors, but they come out as actual door handles that actually pull out.
Where you can actually grab
And you can
them.
get your whole hand in there, pull it out. I thought they were very well designed and implemented.
Let's go back and give some range numbers. The base battery, which is smaller, and the rear drive only model, off the top of my head, what's
260,
something like that. So it's not that much less.
But then you get the extended range, extended battery, and that can get you around 300.
Right.
So you're looking at somewhere between 260 and 300, which for the price, the size, I mean, it's only 100 kilowatt hour
It's
battery
not that
pack.
big.
I mean, that's not huge. I mean, the Lightning
For something that size.
For something that
yeah.
size, because the Lightning's extended one to get that 300 miles, I think, is 130. The Hummer has a 200. So does the Ram Rev.
Well, actually, even their additional weight versus the Telluride is less than typical SUVs that size. Usually it's 1,500 pounds or more. They're at about 1,300 or 1,200 and some.
Just seems like overall everything it just does everything really well.
We said in giving it our Driver's Choice Awards as one of our best EV picks of the year, we said it was the one EV that sort of rose to the top and changed raised the bar for everybody this year, and I think that's true.
Yeah, it was a very nice weekend in the EV9, and I think just to cover pricing again, it starts at like 55, goes all the way up to about 75. Whereas the Telluride starts at about 36 to 53.
Yeah.
So,
other comments?
I felt like the one that we had that was over $70,000 felt pretty luxurious on the inside too. It was incredibly well equipped. I mean, it had I don't know what options it was missing to not be fully loaded. But the fact the rear seats, I mean, your kids are in car seats, Greg, but it had heated and ventilated seats back there.
USB-C ports on the backs of the front seats so that you could charge.
I mean, it was a really nice interior.
Nice big screen.
For what you're paying for. It felt like it reflected that. It was shocking to me how much the ride quality plus just sitting in it, all the materials, just really nice.
Although I did not love two things that I didn't love. So below the center screen, you have your like
Oh,
home
I know what
buttons.
you're going to talk about.
They're not touch buttons. They're
Yeah.
not, and I'm not sure if they're haptic buttons, but
They're not haptic.
they take a little bit too much force to push, and then you're not sure if you pushed it right. So that was a little vague. And then
Yeah.
the climate controls are like on the left side of the center screen, behind the steering wheel and the shifter. So you never really see them. So if you need to make on-the-fly adjustments like you traditionally would, they're hard to see.
Yeah, I was going to see if anybody else had that same issue with the climate being behind the steering
Yeah,
wheel.
you can't
'Cause
see
I
it at
can't
all.
get the perception if
Yeah.
it's like just me being
yeah.
small and
it-
not being able to see.
and
With
we
all
come-
of that
yeah.
space that they had, it's almost like it was like an afterthought.
I would agree with you, Greg, there.
Yeah, so I did the range test on it, and I have to agree with everything that's said about how smooth it is, the regen braking. But there's always, like, when I bring these cars home to my loving parents and I give my friends rides, I always try and find, like, what's the one thing they all comment on. Sometimes it's, oh, wow, this is really smooth, or wow, this is really spacious. And I got some of that. But the one comment I got routinely, friends, interns, everyone, a lot of people had something to say about the wheels. The design of the wheels.
The wheels are really
They had like
big.
Triangles.
big chunky triangle
Yeah.
in the middle of the wheel, which
The arrow was
I guess it's
weird.
kind of cool.
Well,
it wasn't for me.
If you
I could
look at Telluride and even over at Hyundai, the Palisades, a lot of their wheels the last 4 or 5 years have been really geometrically weird.
Yeah,
I
so
guess
that's
is the best way to
So not to say, not that that's the only thing I took away from the EV9, but with regards to this conversation, that's what I got from the EV9.
I'll
Really
say
funky
this: they start conversations.
Oh yeah,
And I'm not, and I didn't like him at first, but now that maybe it's just my
different.
propensity for
It's
a dissenting opinion. I'm like, I kind of like him now. So
They seem to be doing it. I think it's actually a corporate thing that they want to basically be known for wheels that kind of break the mold. And they're still around,
certainly
folks, but they just look weird. All right, so we're going to move on from the EV9 and in a way digress back to the kind of utility vehicles that were hugely popular, a couple of decades ago and body on frame, and they've come back into vogue in the last 4 or 5 years. It's been almost 15 years since the body on frame Lexus GX saw a complete redesign. And while sales of this midsize luxury off-roader have stayed steady, and that's notable for such an aging model, it's got a very popular, a very loyal fan base, it was really overdue for some massive updates. 2024 sees an all-new GX with improvements for both on and off-road driving. Jessica, you drove the new GX out in Arizona. What were your impressions?
So I want to just first off say that I think Lexus just absolutely nailed this new GX. I mean, it's in its 3rd generation now, which for being on sale for, over 2 decades is pretty impressive.
And it still looks familiar to people. It's still basically a very recognizable 2-box design.
Yeah, and I think the 460, the Lexus GX 460, which is the outgoing model, was really like long in the tooth with styling. And this completely just tightens everything up, super boxy. And it now looks like an off-roader to me. When you look at it, you're like, that is a body on frame. That's a truck. Has the huge new Lexus grille that they're using, totally squared off. Looks very similar to the Land Cruiser.
And I think they went the same route that Mercedes did with the G-Wagon.
Yes,
Kept the basic silhouette, but made it modern.
That was a lot of people's comments. They were like, this is like a reliable G-Wagon, right? And certainly a cheaper
And more
one.
affordable.
But yeah, I mean, pretty much Lexus pretty much improved every aspect of this vehicle. And I want to preface it by saying my mom has a 2018 GX, and I drove the new one late January, but I made sure to spend a lot of time in my mom's GX over the holidays so I could have a really good comparison. I drove 600 miles in the last GX to get an idea of okay, how are these different? I think the biggest difference is just sitting in it, driving it, is the lack of body roll. They completely tightened up everything in like the suspension, and even just like the aerodynamics of it. Whereas before it was like very boaty. It was, when you were...
A lot has happened in the ride and handling department in 2 decades.
And so, and then even just like when you would like go to make a turn, everybody's like gravity's coming with you, and then you feel it in the steering wheel. There's like a lot of play. There used to be a lot of play in the steering wheel. Now that has been absolutely sliced. It is not quite as boaty. It's way more precise in the steering. It feels like it's just way more refined. And also,
it feels like it's not just a Toyota Land Cruiser with a nicer interior.
Yes. I mean, it feels like it has more of a purpose now. And so, obviously, another big thing is that there was a V8 engine in it, quite an aging V8 engine. And I think the outgoing powertrain like had a 5-speed automatic. So now we have the 4-liter twin turbo V6 in this that has a 10-speed automatic. It's the same. It's a very similar powertrain, if not the same powertrain that's in the Sequoia. This one makes 349 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque. That's 48 horsepower more than the outgoing V8 and 150 pound-feet of torque more than the outgoing V8. So it's more powerful. It's way smoother. I made a comment in my first drive video that it was also way quieter. I felt like it was quieter, whether like on the outside and then also on the inside, like when it came to like turning on the engine and the engine idling. And people were like, I don't know, what's she talking about? That V8 was ran like a sewing machine. And like, sure, it did, but it was, I mean, it's a V8. I mean, it was loud. It was a loud V8. I'm not saying that the old V8 wasn't a good engine. It was. But this improves power.
This is a Lexus buyer. The Lexus buyer is buying a polished, sophisticated vehicle.
And so in sitting in it, idling, driving, the noise dampening that they did on the inside, way quieter, much easier to have conversations with people in the second row, but also probably the third row. I didn't have anybody back there, but everything seemed way quieter. The on-road driving experience was way smoother. And I think I was in... My favorite trim was the Premium Plus, which is going to be kind of their more volume model. It's not the base model, but it's a step up from that. And
great marketing, because it does not sound like the second lowest model.
I know, right?
It sounds like Premium Plus. Ooh.
Right, because they have the Premium Plus, Luxury Plus, and an Overtrail Plus model. The Overtrails are a brand new model, and those are like more off-road oriented. But I think this like solidly takes the GX from what was a luxury vehicle that was an off-roader to being an off-roader that's a luxury vehicle.
We'll talk about that. I mean, you've got basically a very sturdy frame, same frame family as the Tundra for that matter.
Which is huge news because this previously was related more to the 4Runner.
Right.
But now Toyota and Lexus are consolidating all their body-on-frames to be on the same platform. And what that also does is because this is on a similar frame as the full-size trucks, is this now has a 9,000-pound towing capacity, which I checked is class leading for a midsizer. I think the only thing that does even close is the Durango, which is a little over 8,000, maybe 8,500, something like that. So this 9,000-pound towing capacity on a midsize vehicle. Yeah. I mean...
Not that you necessarily want to do that.
No, but the fact
still,
that you
it's impressive.
can.
And like, that's all frame. I mean, that's what you get when you go with basically a full-size frame.
And a lot of like the design that they did, you'll notice like they have a new hood on it, and it's like a scooped hood. And so part of it is for visibility. You know, you can like... that scoop in the middle allows you to see over the hood better, which I agree absolutely 100% as somebody who's small. But they have, because it's scooped in the middle and it's a little higher on the sides, you can see where your tire placement is, which is really great for when you go off-road, because you have these scoops up there and it's way easier to see like, okay, because you're in a pretty wide vehicle, but you are able to kind of like place where you are, especially like if you're on the trail, if you're on rocks and stuff like that, which is really helpful in the new Overtrail models, which are really off-road oriented models for the trim levels for the GX. They are, well, one thing I will say with a caveat is I didn't get to do too much heavy off-roading with it because they had rain in Arizona apparently and washed out like the really good off-road track, but I got to do some moguls and stuff, so got to see how it handled. They pretty much like have just added a lot like more terrain modes with the GX, so you have more options with like sand and dirt and rocks and stuff. Of course, the Overtrail comes with a standard locking rear differential. They've also put like 33-inch tires on it that you can get. Not so great on the road, but definitely really great
They've toughened it.
off-road.
They toughened it up.
Do they simplify the whole off-roading setup inside? Because I remember in the GX, the previous one, you kind of get overwhelmed looking at all the buttons and knobs, and it was if you didn't already know what you were doing, you might be a little confused or overwhelmed. So I'm wondering, like, did they simplify it kind of like they did in some of Toyota's like TRD Pro models? And
yeah,
I recall I haven't driven it, but I sat in it at the Chicago Auto Show, and it stood out to me as still a more purpose-built vehicle than your typical Lexus, but the controls didn't seem too much out of place. I think there's one lever.
Yeah, so what they ended up doing was the old interior was formatted like as a vertical. Yeah. So it was like kind of going down. Now it's all horizontal, and so they have like a display up at the top, and they've kind of like kept everything that's like infotainment and climate up by there, but by where the gear shifter is, which is it's still a very traditional gear shift, kind of down under that. That's where like all the drive modes are, how to like if you can lock the differentials, moving into like your 4 low, 4 high. That's all down there.
It doesn't look like they added on like with the previous model. Every time they came out with a new feature, it was like a new button somewhere.
No, I mean it all seems very streamlined, super simple, which I'm very glad that they did, because the old interior was. It's the same interior that my mom has in her GX. I really am not a fan of it. I did not think it was very good.
Over 15 years, you keep adding stuff on, and you don't redesign the dash. That's what you get.
Yeah, and so it's definitely like streamlined. Feels pretty nice and premium on the interior too.
Sorry, I don't know why you said 15 years, and I feel like we kind of gloss over 15 years.
That's a
but
lot.
that is having a child, and then the child goes to high school.
That's
how long
and
that
that's
is.
2 cycles for most vehicles.
Yes. Yeah, and that's kind of like why I wanted to.
But in
point that
Toyota
out.
years, it's only like 7.
And they did give like they actually only gave it an update in the interior in 2022. And it kind of got that same like dual or like screen setup that the LX has right now, which I wasn't a big fan of. But now they've got the big 14-inch screen that's very similar that we see in the TX.
Yeah, they went from having probably some of the worst screens to probably now some of the best screens between Toyota and Lexus.
Oh yeah,
that whole update that started with the Lexus NX and that whole infotainment.
And they've
the new
they've improved the infotainment systems a lot.
Yeah. My only, again, I've said this about every Toyota, and I don't know if I can turn it off or not. But like when I'm using CarPlay and I'm talking to Siri, she talks over the radio. Like so if I'm listening to Spotify, the music doesn't stop, it doesn't go down, it stays as loud as it stays. And then I'm like yelling at Siri, please change the station or something like that. And actually my Siri's going off right now.
But listen to what we're complaining about.
I know.
Alex, do you have any comment on it? I know you haven't really.
Yeah,
seen
I haven't spent any time with it. I haven't driven it. I haven't done anything. But I remember writing, when the reveal happened, and I just remember bringing up the photos, being like, "Wow, that's what they've decided to do." I mean, I love it. I think it's great. The Overtrails, real quick, aren't they? They're just 5-seaters, right?
Yes, I should mention that. you have the ability to have this as a 6 or 7-seater, except for in the Overtrail and Overtrail Plus. Those are only 5-seaters. So I guess the way that they looked at it was for those who are going to buy it, like for purpose made off-roading, they don't want that third
Because they'll
row.
probably build it out.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to have that third row anyway.
And they're powered, the third row, so it takes up a lot of space. Like the cargo area in this is not, I'll say it's not improved from the previous generation. I mean, the load floor is a little bit lower because of the new design, but otherwise, like it's still okay. Like that third row, you can't like put a bunch of suitcases back there and go on a trip in the third row. If you want to do that, that's why you buy a Lexus TX. That's kind of why that product exists, and the GX can kind of be its own thing. And the last thing I'll mention is that this has a starting price of $65,000 and will go up to about $75,000 for like the more top level.
Which is not too
luxury
bad
cars.
when you go over and price the full size stuff at General Motors, particularly.
Oh, no. I mean, they plan to sell 33,000 units this year, and I think they will sell every single one of them.
Lexus GX, EV9 from Kia, two excellent choices and very different yet somewhat the same in SUV land. And we have one more vehicle we're going to talk about. We're going to push it to the end of this podcast, so be sure to stick around as we dive into the just unveiled 2024 Dodge Charger. I think you're all going to be very impressed and maybe a little surprised at some of the details. But before we get on to the rest of today's podcast, I want to stop and thank the sponsors of this podcast and of our television series, MotorWeek. Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper, along with TireRack.com. We know our viewers and our listeners appreciate your dedication to MotorWeek, and to all of our MotorWeek fans, we hope that when you're in the market for auto parts or tires, you will give our sponsors a fair look. I think you'll also be surprised what they can offer you as well. Okay, we're going to turn now to our lightning round, where basically we give each of our panelists a chance to talk about a trending automotive topic, and this is the result of a recent viral tweet. Ex-user Barrett O'Neill posted a photograph of his family totaled Jeep Wrangler after his Wagoneer, after his wife and child were in a head-on collision with a delivery truck that crossed over a double yellow line at 40 miles per hour. No one, fortunately, was seriously injured, but O'Neill cautioned ex-users by saying, "Do not put your family in a small car." He said the officer on site told him if she was driving a smaller car, it would have been fatal. They had just bought that Wagoneer a month before the accident. In an accident, does size and weight make all the difference? That's kind of what the question is here. And over 37 million people got in on this discussion on whether or not larger vehicles are inherently safer for drivers and passengers. So what do you think around this table about size? Does it matter? And while we're on that, let's also add to it weight, especially with all these new EVs coming. Should you be looking for your family something larger, the largest thing you can afford?
I have a lot.
Right?
I
And
feel like
Greg is the
Greg
best
certainly
person
has like a
to start that
I have
discussion.
so much to say on this topic that I'm not going to be able to get into 30 seconds. And
Well,
probably
the-
without
the
making a
clock
lot of
has
people
not
upset.
started yet, so.
Yeah, I've always been a big opponent of people getting things that are bigger than they need. Same thing with people. I've had friends who say I need a pickup truck, but I don't really do a lot of stuff. And I say, okay, well, how about a Ridgeline or Santa Cruz or a
Mid-size
Maverick?
versus full size.
How about a Tacoma? Right. Nope. And they go right out and they get a full-size half-ton pickup truck. Like, you don't, like, we all have some responsibility without getting too much into the politics to just use what we need. We're the land of excess. That's just, maybe we've gone beyond that. That's my personal feeling. As far as this question, it's physics. Speed and weight equals more force. So yeah, it's a bigger deal when a big thing runs into a smaller thing. Does that mean everybody should go out and get the biggest vehicle possible? Again, I don't think so. I don't think that's the answer. It reminds me of another political and public safety issue that I'm not going to get into right now by throwing more things at it, thinking it's going to solve the problem. I think there's other things we can do to solve this problem that don't involve just making and buying bigger vehicles. So yeah, to answer the question, bigger vehicles are technically safer when you're running into other bigger vehicles. I would argue let's try to not run into other vehicles.
Well, if with all of the modern safety systems that are on vehicles now, they do come into play and they can mitigate some of the impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't like the idea of scaring people who don't know so much about vehicle safety, maybe not so well informed about it, like scaring parents into thinking you need to have a big vehicle in order to keep your family safe, and if you don't have a big vehicle, your family won't be safe. That's not true.
It is not true.
I always love to tell people that cars now, I mean, granted, we talk about pricing for cars. They're more expensive than they have ever been. But cars now are safer than they have ever been.
At all levels. It starts
levels.
with the structure, which is designed to take the impact exactly the size. One of the reasons they walked away from this vehicle, this accident, was their Wagoneer was designed to take the impact from the front and actually spread it to the rear of the vehicle, away from the occupants. And all modern vehicles are designed that
and there's
way.
a lot of the things I think goes to the IIHS doing stuff like the
Yes.
small overlap when they were calling brands out, being like, yeah, you might pass these tests, but here's what happens in
Here's
most
the real
accidents.
world.
Here's a real world scenario, and guess what? They were failing miserably. So that required them. People were seeing these crashes and thinking, "Oh my God, that can't happen to my family." And now, as it should be, manufacturers are now realizing this and figuring out how to get through these real world crash scenarios safely.
They were shamed into it.
And I think in mentioning the IIHS is a
That's
great
the Insurance
example.
Institute for Highway Safety.
They do
by the way.
a lot of the crash testing that you see that goes like viral on the internet and stuff like that. But they actually, within the last 2 years, have had to increase the weight of their side impact barrier for this exact reason, because vehicles are getting bigger. And once they did that, then the manufacturers were not getting their top safety pick pluses, which is what everybody wants.
Everybody
That's
wants
their
it.
top award that they can give to a vehicle. And they weren't getting that. So then guess what happens? The next year, they make the vehicle even better and better. And one thing I also really want to mention too is that just because a vehicle is bigger does not mean that it is safer, especially because
That's probably the answer that we should have all started off with.
Not every single vehicle, believe it or not, only about 80% of vehicles that are sold are actually crash tested by independent sources and not just by the automakers.
And there's a big difference between passing the test that the government puts out and IIHS. IIHS goes way above the federal standards.
And so, like, you know what full-size vehicle has never been crash tested? A Toyota Sequoia.
Interesting.
Has not by the IIHS or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The reason for that is because it has been a low volume product. They don't test low volume product. They don't test Porsches and like I think the Lexus like LC500 doesn't go through those because they only sell 2,000 of them a year, something like that. But my point being is that people buy Sequoias, and so we don't have a 5-star rating necessarily on that. But not to say it's not safe.
It probably would still pass.
It would probably still.
Knowing the manufacturers, I mean, once they start making all of their vehicles pass, it's when you start upgrading the vehicle, that's what you do.
But my point being is just because it's big,
right?
You know what I mean? Like that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like for me, it's a don't knock it till you try it. I was recently talking to somebody who still doesn't trust backup cameras. Which I get.
I can't hardly drive a vehicle.
I kind of, well, that's what I was getting at. Anyway, don't just look at, airbags save lives.
Right.
Yeah, crumple zones save lives. But blind spot monitoring saves lives. Rear cross traffic alert saves lives. And a lot of headache, honestly, mostly headache. Front collision warning, automatic stopping, things like that. Don't just look at the crash test. Look at those things too, and really dig into when you're going to buy a vehicle. really look at that spec sheet and see what comes with those safety systems, because that makes a difference.
If you are tight on money and you go in and the salesperson's telling you all the safety features that the vehicle's got on it from the get-go, please do yourself a favor and ask, if I pay a little more, can I get more safety? Because generally speaking, you go up one level, only one level, and you basically can load up a vehicle with all of the new safety features, and they are well worth having.
Alex.
30 seconds.
Alex, come on, Alex.
Here we go.
We took all of his.
Here we go.
You know, when I see things like this, I'm not trying to necessarily stir the pot, but I liken it to mutually assured destruction, in the sense that, oh, well, that guy's got a big truck. I got to get a big truck to protect myself. And like, I know that's maybe oversimplifying it, but I think there's that idea of, well, everyone else has something big. I got to get something big too. And maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but then at the same time, we're talking about all the safety tech, and I agree with all this, but at a certain point, there's also just sheer human reaction. What good is having this big SUV that's going to protect you in a crash if you're driving on 695 with your cell phone in your hand, not paying attention? That's where I kind of get fired up about this stuff, because for every person I see driving these Sequoias and these trucks and whatever, if you're distracted and you're not paying attention, you're not doing your duty to everyone else on the road. You're basically saying, well, I mean, if we get in a wreck, I'll be fine. Like, and that's not even a guarantee. It's certainly not. But I think, you know, I understand the idea. I know we can sit here and argue like, oh, well, in bigger vehicles, they take longer to stop. Theoretically, you may not be able to react to things that run out on the road and things like that. And that's all true. But at the end of the day, like, safety also comes down to the individual as well. So when I see people, you know, and I'm not saying
like
these people,
Smokey the Bear, you can prevent forest fires.
You've really hit on a very key thing, because all of these safety features that are on modern cars today, if you are negligent in your duty to drive, you're pretty much nulling out all of the advantages, especially things like stability control and anti-lock brakes. Just a little bit more speed can actually take away most of their advantages.
That's a really great point. I think especially because like cars are so nice now. I mean, gosh, like a Wagoneer is a great example. That driving is so luxurious that you could be driving 85 miles an hour and really not feel like you're driving 85 miles an hour. When I'm driving 85 miles an hour in my Jeep, I know I'm driving 85 miles an hour because I don't do it because it's awful. But yeah, speed is another proponent. And in this case, only 40 miles an hour.
Right, and that's the example here is the delivery truck crossed over a double yellow. And I don't know the exact situation, but you know, crossing over a double yellow makes me think.
Most people who are paying attention do not do that.
Right, exactly.
The driver actually had a medical emergency.
Okay, so that's
and here's something else.
Different.
If that truck was only doing 40 miles an hour, but if the Wagoneer was also doing 40 miles an hour, that's a closing speed. That's an 80 mile per hour collision.
Yep.
And that's something people also, I'm going at slow speed, I don't have to worry about it. Yes, you do.
I think this kind of rounds out to being like we all have like a personal responsibility to drive very safely.
Physics says, you know, more weight, more size, you've got an advantage. But it's not basically as big an advantage as you might think because of modern car technology. And it really comes down to you paying attention while you drive. Yeah. And with that very spirited discussion, we're going to get on to a discussion of how we drive and a criticism from Dan.
Slamming on the brakes as hard as we can.
Right. Dan wants to know, why was there no braking test on our Corvette Z06 review we just aired recently? And what do we have to say to that? I've got an answer.
I mean, you tell me, John. You're the boss. Well, you just tell me go out and drive. That's
here's the deal. Here's the deal. That was a track test, more than a street test. That Z06 ultra high performance Corvette. It was at our winter testing track at Roebling Road Raceway. And when we go to Roebling Road, we do braking tests on some vehicles, but often we just rely on the impressions from our drivers for where it counts on a racetrack, and that is braking in high-speed corners. And that's what we did with this particular car. We can tell you it stops on a dime, but we didn't do our normal 0 to 60 braking run because we were more interested in, frankly, how this car would brake at close to 160 miles per hour coming down the front straight. And the answer is it did phenomenally.
Yeah, I can speak firsthand to that. It's definitely not something new. We've kind of done it.
We've pretty much done this way for a long time.
And it goes hand in hand with something else we've talked about, where brakes have gotten so good and so consistent that while we do, every car we get here that goes to our Mason-Dixon dragway does get brake tested. We do the numbers, we get them, and we record them. But because we've found over years that they're all stopping at a very, very good and safe distance, unless it is outside the norm, whether that be worse than expected or much better than expected, we don't really have the time in our road test to talk about it. But
well, there are other things that we feel are more important. Here's some food for thought. If you go back and look at our road test from 20 years ago, so we're now talking the turn of the century, 2004, you will find that the average vehicle we tested probably stopped from 60 miles an hour in about 130 feet. Mm-hmm. Some of them more. If you go back to the beginning of when we started MotorWeek, it was 150 to 160 feet.
Those are fun to watch.
And we still have a spot on our performance sheet for wheel lock.
Yes.
Does it lock?
And nothing
locks
locks
anymore.
So now we're seeing a okay braking for us today is about 110 feet.
Yeah, that's
and it used to. I remember the
110
first time we tested anything that stopped under 100 feet, and I think it was either a Porsche or a Mercedes.
Definitely a Porsche.
And we thought, holy moly, this is unbelievable.
Now it's all the
Now
time.
it's fairly routine between 100 and 110, just about everything does.
I think the last time we tested a Tahoe, it stopped under 100 feet.
I think that's probably right.
I'm very confident.
We just tested something, and it's not. It'll come out in our test that I think took 130 feet, and we thought, well, it was a cold day, and maybe there wasn't much grip. The tires didn't help, and they were not normal street tires, and we were saying, it's okay, but we wish it was better. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, most cars today stop incredibly fast. I mean, think about it, 20 feet, that's a car length, and that's the difference between a serious accident and one that's just a fender bender.
And I'd say specific to the Z06, like it has these incredibly beefy brakes.
Right.
It's kind of, not to say it's unnecessary, but at the same time, kind of unnecessary.
Well, it has track
proper braking test.
Track
honestly,
tested brakes.
For something with carbon ceramic brakes, which I think those had.
Yeah.
Even if it didn't, if we were to test something like that, those brakes don't operate well until they're up to temperature. So if we did numbers,
that is an interesting point.
We would have to run it, get them warm, then get those numbers. But the problem with that is that wouldn't simulate most likely a real world situation where the brakes are colder.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like that kind of, there's lots of things to consider.
Right.
So there's your long drawn out answer.
Anyway, Dan, if you buy a Z06, I don't think you've got anything to worry about, except as Greg mentioned, you might want to get on them just to see what the difference is between cold brakes and hot brakes. And of course, that's true of any car. Mm. Okay, now to our headliner of today's podcast. Dodge unveiled their Charger Daytona SRT concept vehicle back in 2022. Previewing the all-electric next-generation Charger performance sedan. It was met with both wonder and hesitation as buyers weren't ready to replace a V8 engine with electric motors, not yet anyway. Well, the full details are finally out on the next-gen Dodge Charger, and it includes options for everyone. Alex, tell us more about this 8th-Gen Charger that you were on site to see unveiled.
He wasn't there.
Well,
in person.
We saw it on screen. We saw it on a big screen.
Yeah, that's if the site is here, my desk.
I consider that on site. I mean,
it counts.
It was the same as actually you had a better seat than if you'd been there.
You know what? That's true. That's true. Yeah, so we are talking about a new Charger. This is not a post-mortem look at a dying breed. This is a brand new Charger. Of course, when the Charger went away, I think we all kind of knew that it wasn't going to stay dead for long. It was not going to stay buried. It was going to come back.
Well, even they said that.
Right, and especially when you name trims like Hellcat and Demon and stuff, you just know there's going to be some sort of exorcist bringing it back. Yeah, exactly. What is surprising, or at least surprising to me, is how soon we're getting this, because this will be, in fact, a 2024 model year. They should be arriving.
And that's kind of weird in itself, because here we are in March. Most everything else coming out is a 25 already.
Yeah, and I believe we will be getting these in the summer, or at least production begins mid-24. So what we saw, or those first models that are coming out, are the Charger Daytonas. These are the all-electric versions of them. And I say that because we've already alluded to this, there are internal combustion engines, which I'll get to in a minute, but the spoiler there, you can ruminate on this a little bit, is that the Hemi is no more. The Hemi has gone away. But it's okay, it's got an exciting engine in place of it, but we're on that in a little bit. What's more exciting to me personally is that the Charger is now back as a two-door model, which...
It's a hatchback too.
Yeah, and what's funny about that is in the press briefing, or in the whatever you want to call it, the backgrounder, they were saying like, yeah, when we came out with the Charger, years ago, and it was a four-door, we got some grief for it, and all that.
Because the original Charger was a two-door.
And I was like sitting there at my desk, and I was like, yeah, that was me. I mean, I was a teenager and I didn't know any better. Look, I love the new Charger, I really do. I totally understand why they made it a four-door, but I love the originals as well. So that two-door is very iconic to me. That being said, there is going to be a four-door version of that.
And they're going to call it Charger.
Yep, and it is going to come out along with the gasoline ones early, like first quarter 2025. So those will be the 2025 model years. So the ones I'm going to talk about first are the 24 model years. Those are, again, the Daytonas. So all of these are built on the Stellantis, the STLA large platform. And I guess we kind of talked about this before the podcast, that it seems like in this case, they're maybe figuring out it's easier to build it as an EV first and then offer an internal combustion powertrain as opposed to starting with something that's ICE and then saying, okay, well, how do we cram
It's the trend in the industry. Instead of designing two different chassis to be able to do any kind of propulsion, it's an agnostic chassis. You can put just about anything in it.
Is that your term?
No, I borrowed it from somebody
I was going to say, that was great. I like that.
I actually borrowed it from some of the heavy-duty work trucks. The big work trucks are heading down that same path.
Okay. Well, here in the Daytona, it depends. There's two different trims, or at least at launch. I'm sure there will be more, but at launch there'll be two different trims. They both get a 100 kilowatt hour battery. It's about 94 kilowatts usable, give or take. That goes to two electric drive modules, or EDMs as they call it, one up front, one in back. So these are all-wheel drive.
Standard
all-wheel drive. So the two trims you can get an RT, you can get a Scat Pack. Now that's very familiar to what we have. The RT can do 496 horsepower and 404 pound-feet of torque. The Scat Pack is 670 horsepower and 627 pound-feet of torque. Now that does include this like power shot thing that you activated on the button. It's like a steering wheel button, and it gives you like 40 extra horsepower, but still put it in quotes there, a standard 630
That's on the Hornet too, right?
Yeah, they have a similar function there.
Cool. That's such a Dodge thing.
Now, what I didn't realize when I first read the press briefing or the press materials is that those first year, those 24s, they're coming factory with these kits from Direct Connection, these different stage kits. So that's how they can get that extra horsepower. Supposedly, in later years, the RT and the Scat Pack will not come standard with that. So they'll have a little less power. I don't think it's going to be that much less, but there will be a little less power. So what does that mean? On a Scat Pack, that's a 0 to 60 time of 3.3 seconds, an 11.5 second quarter mile. Now, the top speed, like we've seen with other EVs, does kind of taper off. It's 134 miles per hour, which, is not blistering fast, but I don't think anyone's buying these for top speed necessarily. I think those quarter mile times are what they're really going to care about. We also got range numbers, which I was actually a little surprised by that we got official range numbers here. So the RT is going to be the best one here at 317 miles. The Scat does lose a little bit there at 260, but again.
But this is a big, not flat, but broad hooded, performance vehicle. This is a large vehicle, what we would have. We used to call them full-size cars. I mean, it's the closest thing we've got to a full-size car.
Large is literally in the platform name.
Yep. And I believe curb weight's just around 6,000 pounds, give or take. Puts it there. Speaking to the length real quick.
Wow, really? Curb? That would put it like right near a
Hummer.
That
Hummer's
and the EV9.
Yeah, Hummer's what, 8,000. So the EV9 6. Yeah,
Right.
very close.
Just speaking very quickly to that length, and again, the spec sheet I have was for these Daytonas. I don't know how this is going to change, if at all, for like the 4-door model or for the
gas
ones.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll really change.
It'll be a little different.
Right. But we're looking at a 206-inch length overall on a 121-inch wheelbase. To compare that to the current Charger, you're looking at a 198, we'll say 199-inch body on a 120-inch wheelbase. So it's not
so it's close. So it's pretty close.
But roughly in the ballpark. But I'm sure some people are tired of hearing about the EV. They want to hear about those gas engines. Well, like I said, the Hemi is no more. But what we got instead is a bit of a whirlwind. Sorry for the pun. It is the Hurricane. I know you can kick me off the podcast after this. Yeah, you don't have to. Don't give me sympathy.
He's a writer, folks.
Yeah, better for worse. Yeah, so it's the Hurricane Inline 6. We've actually tested this in a few other products before from Stellantis, and I think the overall consensus. Yep, twin turbo, 3 liters, Inline 6. I think the overall consensus here is that we like this powertrain.
It's a really nice powertrain.
And people. You stop a second and just mention that when you do an inline 6, you do that for torque, and torque is pulling power.
Which is funny because I don't have the torque written down because I don't know if in the press material they listed the torque.
And it's going to be different than what it's used by.
Yeah,
Jeep.
but they just did horsepower numbers.
Yes, because what we have, there are 2 versions of this, a high output and a low output. They're both called the 6-pack, which is very cool. The low output, or the LO, is going to be 420 horses. The HO, the high output, is 550, which is pretty rad.
None of that is really surprising considering they're very similar numbers that we've seen in both the Wagoneer and the Ram 1500. Sure. But that high output in this Charger is actually more horsepower. I think like 30 more horsepower potentially than on its truck counterparts. So that's pretty cool.
And another thing that's maybe surprising here is we already talked about it, that Daytona SRT concept that got unveiled 18 months ago, give or take.
Is that the Banshee? Is that what they called it?
So we've been talking about 2-door, 4-door, all this, and you can go look at the pictures online. But just to give you an idea of this right now, this is probably the closest, or at least that I can think of, that a production model has looked to a concept model. That Daytona SRT that they put out, I mean, this thing is, I'm sure they cheated here and there, a couple of the dimensions, but for the most part, this thing looks almost identical.
Yeah, it's very also retro inspired.
It is very retro inspired.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it invokes a bit of '68 Charger in it, which I think is very cool.
I think it's a lot.
I mean, if you look at from the 3/4 rear, and you kind of see it's the roof line coming back. It really does look like the '60s Chargers. Same with the front with the grille.
Except that they've incorporated a very useful hatchback, and that's and then that's actually very European. That may be some of the Stellantis European influence. Anyway.
Yeah, and speaking to the front end, they have this new on the electric models. It's called the R-Wing. It's patent pending, so nobody steal it.
Describe what that is. That's a kind of a toughie.
So all right.
You got this broad hood.
Yeah, you've got this long hood, short rear deck, and at the very front of your hood, you have the new Fratzonic logo that sits there, and then above that, think like a spoiler almost on the front of the vehicle. But it's not a spoiler that sticks up from the body. It is part of that front end. I know it's not the same idea as the Superbirds from way back when, but I almost think of an aero treatment in the front. This does add downforce, also acts as an air pass-through. So imagine the air hitting your grill. Obviously, it would go around. Chargers of old especially are built, they're probably about as aerodynamic as a sofa. This is a way to kind of get rid of that. Air can pass through over the top and then go over the hood. There is kind of a divide in the middle again for that logo there, but it kind of passes through the hood, gives a little downforce, and then just kind of goes off the sides. It is very, I think by today's standards, this is very squared off, but it's not it's not like the old ones where it's a perfect square or anything like that. It does have some round edges there to let that air pass through. Another big thing here that people are going to feel about is the Fratzonic chambered exhaust, which is not just a speaker mounted to the back. But okay, so it's
Kind of
basically
like
a speaker
just a
that's
speaker.
mounted to the back, but it does feed into different chambers like an exhaust would. And they've been tuning this sound. It's a thing. They have been tuning this over and over again for years. It's supposed to give us like Hellcat levels of decibels. I'm sure the sound's going to change even more as time goes on. What I think is more interesting is apparently on the Scat Pack, if you get a track pack with it, which is a lot of packs here. Track Pack. You can get Goodyear Eagle. Yep. You can get Goodyear Eagle F1 Supercar 3s for the tires. Those are 305s up front, 325s in the rear on staggered 20 inches.
That's
and apparently that is the biggest tire pack ever used by Dodge on like a production, like what they're selling off the lot. That is awesome.
They have just gone over the top to make sure that this car fulfills almost every possible desire of old Charger and Challenger owners.
They're trying as hard as they can to reel these people into believing and getting behind this new era of Charger. They're pulling out every trick in the Dodge
I got to
book.
give Stellantis credit.
Oh,
they are trying to bridge the gap like no other automaker between this and what they're doing over at Ram with the new hybrid. They really are looking at, we want to make sure whatever way the market goes, we got it covered.
Sure.
And we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And I have to give them a lot of credit.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is like, so if I hadn't seen a picture of it and no one had said that this was a Dodge Charger, they just gave me all the facts. I feel like after reading this or hearing that, I would have been like, that's a Dodge, whatever you're describing. This is like the personification of what Dodge will do. I think this thing looks great. Yeah. If you get a chance, please go on our website, go to the This Just In, look at the pictures, read the article. Personally, I think this thing looks sick. And it's not just because we have an orange one.
Comments? Guys, I mean, we're obviously all a long way from driving it, although we've already called and said basically we want to be first in line. Hopefully we will be.
I mean, I think it looks really good. Like I mentioned, it's got that retro-inspired look to it, which, if you go back and look at those 1960s Chargers, like you take that, and this is pretty much an evolution of that. It's really what it feels like. More
evolution than revolution, even though it is revolution.
And I think, really happy to see that the Hurricane engine being in this vehicle. I think they've put so much time and effort and money into that powertrain. It would seem ridiculous that they would not put it into such an important plate.
Absolutely. Greg, anything to closing thought?
I mean, I've been talking a lot this podcast. We've gone pretty long. I could get into this one pretty deeply.
No, I didn't ask that. I asked for a closing shot.
I got to see this thing in person because I know you guys really
here we go.
And I'm not going to argue about styling. I'm just going to say my closing statement is I can't wait to see it in person, and I can't wait to drive it. And I am very curious to see the take from people who aren't in automotive media. I want to see how people,
what they think,
how the everyday Joe might already own a Challenger.
But will they even know? I mean, if they're not into it, I'm not so sure.
I think this is a very interesting concept for me, and I cannot wait to see what happens.
I can't wait to compare the two, honestly. Yeah.
Oh, there'll be lots of comparisons. And by the way, don't count Hemi as dead. And the reason I say that is Hemi refers to the design of the combustion chamber, which was actually added to the current generation of V8 engine design.
Remember, it was a whole thing when Hemi came back.
Absolutely. And there's nothing that, I don't know if there's nothing, but it might even happen down the road that we'll see a Hemi version of
Porsche still calls their EVs turbos.
That's right.
Turbo in that thing, and the Taycan.
Don't count Hemi out. Okay, before we wrap up this podcast, does anyone have a rant or rave? That's pretty much what we've been doing for the last hour.
I think we should just forego it.
Let's get rid of that one today.
All right. Everybody out there, thanks for listening for our podcast today. Thanks for everybody that was involved. You're wondering, I bet, first time you've listened to us, what is MotorWeek? Where can you see it? Well, go to your local public television station. You want to find out the times and days. Go to our website first, motorweek.org. Click on the tab, Watch MotorWeek. and then enter your zip code for the days and times in your area. Or hop over to our cable partner, the good folks over at mavtv.com, for their schedule. You can also stream all of our episodes for free on your mobile device. We mentioned it at the top of the show. Go download the PBS app. It's available for every smart device at your app store or streaming channel library. Also, don't forget to download the PBS app. All of the individual road tests and feature segments are also available over at youtube.com/MotorWeek. In short, and we say this every time we do a podcast, if you've got a screen, you can watch MotorWeek. Thanks, Greg Carlos, Alex Kellum, and our podcast producer, Jessica Ray. Thanks, audio engineer Austin Harris, and podcast creator Bob Mixter. I'm John Davis. Thanks to all of you for being a part of MotorWeek.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.